Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Imperial HoloNet. I am JID123, and today I'm joined by Jake Carlson and Connor Nielsen, and hopefully one of our friends, Red Leader Antilles, will come by. He's running a little late. And today we are going to talk about Scott Snyder's The Court of Owls. And I have here my two comics, Volume 1, The Court of Owls, and I have, just in case, Volume 2, City of Owls by my side in case we are go. So, how we're gonna start is we're just gonna give our general thoughts first, and then we're going to just talk about it. So, I'll start us off. I read this just like a day, just kind of zoomed through it. Well, I mean not zoomed through it, but I'll just say this. So, and we'll talk about this later, but, one of the big things is the whole it rips off a lot of the Grant Morrison run of comics. Um, See, I have no personal dog in that fight just because I'm not completely familiar with his work. I mean, I've read it and I like it. I don't get it because he's, Mr. Super Genius. Um, but so I just kind of judged this comic on its own without sort of like any baggage of being a Grant Morrison fan and whatnot. Um, but that being said, I don't know. It wasn't doing it for me, fellas. I just wasn't feeling it. I know that's like very vague and anti-analytical, but it's like I was reading it like, this story just isn't doing it for me. I don't know why. Even the artwork, which it's not ugly, but just like, it's just not popping this style for me. I don't know really what it is. Maybe and I'm sure we can get into that later. But just like, these two comics not doing it for me. So yeah, that's just my general thoughts. Connor, you go next.
Before I give my thoughts, going too quickly what you were talking about with the art, this is Greg Capullo, but did you like the art in Zero Year very much? Did you prefer that art as opposed to this art?
A little bit more, yeah. That stood out a little bit more to me.
Okay, I think what's probably interesting is that is a different inker on Greg Capullo's pencils. That's Danny McKee, and this is Jonathan Glapion.
Hmm.
So I think their inking styles are quite different. So I think that might be what was maybe making this a little bit more murky for you. I actually do prefer Danny McKee's inks over Jonathan Glapion's. So I don't know. Anyways, Scott Snyder's The Court of Owls is his inaugural run or inaugural story arc on the main Batman title. This was after he had been doing his run on Detective Comics for the previous year, which is collected as the Black Mirror. This is the New 52. So issue 1 is the first issue of The Court of Owls is issue number 1 of the New 52 run as well. So this is the first Batman comic I ever read. The first current. When it was current, this was the first Batman comic I had ever read. So I have a lot of nostalgia for this series. I guess I can't have nostalgia. It's like only 6 years old at this point, almost 7. But wow,
That's
it's almost
nostalgia. That's nostalgia enough for me.
It's
Like,
almost 7 years old. Are you? Whoa. Okay, that was 7 years ago. I'm just realizing. Okay, so I really loved this series when I first read it. I remember starting reading comics, and I read Justice League #1. I was like, meh. And I read Action Comics #1 by Grant Morrison, and I quite enjoyed that. Green Lantern #1 didn't do it for me. Wonder Woman #1 by Brian Azzarello didn't like it because I had much to learn. And then I got to this, and this one just leapt off the page at me. Like, it immediately got my attention. I was hooked. I loved the characterization. The dialogue I thought was fun. The art was moody. And this was my favorite run. This is my favorite titles that I was collecting when I had first started, and I was just hooked. Every issue, I just couldn't wait to read the next installment. And I think what we should probably say is that The Court of Owls is an 11-part story that, because of DC mandates to get all of the volume 1s out in a relatively similar time span, is collected as 2 volumes. So you'll often hear people say volumes 1 and 2, The Court of Owls / The City of Owls, and it's just one story called The Court of Owls. I think that's how it should be, because even on issue number 11, it says Court of Owls finale on the issue. So my general thoughts are, after all these years, I just finished reading Justice League No Justice, which is the latest thing Scott Snyder has unleashed upon DC Comics, and I hated it. I was bewildered at how bad it was, and it was weird because I felt like
You mean this or No Justice?
No Justice was
Okay, yeah.
unholy trash. I could not.
Yep.
Oh my!
Like there was no editor, and they were making up as they went. I can't believe it. But I remember I loved Scott Snyder, so going back to this was interesting.
Connor, you're cutting out a little bit.
Oh no.
Okay, I can hear you.
The last thing you said is going back to this was interesting. I don't know if you want to restart what you just said, but
Going back to this was interesting because there was a time where I loved Scott Snyder. Like everything he put out, I loved, and I think it holds up. I still like this. I don't know if that's just my old sensibilities, coming in, or that sense of discovery and realizing that I liked comics for the first time was with this book. I don't know if that was just like, I can't believe how bad No Justice was, so going back to anything better was like comfort. But I do think this is pretty good. I've read Grant Morrison's run on Batman. I don't get why people say this plagiarizes. I guess Grant Morrison is the only person who can.
Oh, you cut out again.
Batman fighting secret societies.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm just being unnecessarily snarky. My bad.
No.
I don't think this rips off Grant Morrison, and I think that the art is fabulous, and I think the ending is bad, but I think that overall this is a very strong book.
Oh.
Kind of indicative of where DC was at its time, where it gets turned into an event halfway through that it does not need to be, with like tie-in books and all this sort of stuff, but I still like it. Whatever.
That's fair. Jake, you go last because I know you also had a lot of notes like the history of DC going on during this time. What was on the up and up? So you go.
All right. Well, before we get into the nitty gritty of what's going on here, which I think suffers from the sort of Snyder-isms, the tropes of his writing, which is the main, the protagonist is at a point of his life where he's cocky in some way, and then this ancient evil, it's always described as ancient. It's described as ancient in The Court of Owls. It's described as ancient in Superman Unchained. It's described as ancient in No Justice. It's described as ancient in Justice League and his Justice League that's coming out right now. Same thing with Metal. The protagonist is faced with this ancient evil where he's forced to reevaluate himself and his values and his relationships to the people around him, but then it gets bogged down by all this, over analyzing dialogue boxes and inner monologues. And by the end of the story, the character has changed a little bit, and which is interesting because usually characters in comics don't change that much, and if they do, the change doesn't last very long. But the change that occurs is handed to us on a silver platter by another character explaining word for word the symbolic meaning of the story to another character. And I just don't need that. That's like writer 101 of what you don't want to do as a storyteller, is tell the reader what to think and how they should interpret the story and what meaning they should walk away with. But before we get into all that, even though there is some good stuff here, just to talk broadly about Grant Morrison's run on Batman and Snyder's run on Batman and how those two things sort of work out. So Grant Morrison's run on Batman starts in 2006 with Batman realizing that there is this secret organization that's been controlling the city from the very beginning that also knows his identity, a secret organization that breaks his psychology by attacking him on a psychological level. And then he goes on this journey with the Joker, who also goes on a different journey where he reevaluates their relationship. And then that culminates in the secret organization being defeated, and then Batman and Joker have a face-off. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And then Batman dies, someone else takes his place, the Joker moves on, and when Batman returns, he has returned in the sense that he is now a Bat God and reclaims his mantle. So if I had not preceded that explanation of what happens in Grant Morrison's run on Batman by saying it happens in Grant Morrison's run on Batman, you would think that would happen that I was describing Scott Snyder's run on Batman, because that is exactly what happens in Scott Snyder's Batman. The sequence of Court of Owls, Death of the Family, and Endgame is the exact same as Batman and Son, Black Glove, and Batman R.I.P. is in. And yes, it is bringing the big strokes of the plot, but it's not even just that. It's the same characters, the same symbols, it's the same themes. It is literally almost page for page, like the breakdowns, like the story outline of what's going to happen and what this character is going to do. But Scott Snyder is writing it worse than Grant Morrison did.
Yeah, but we got owls in this version, buddy. We got owls, not gloves. Just kidding.
Well, and the thing is, the Court of Owls is just not as interesting as the Black Glove. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not. And that doesn't even get into how poorly the mystery is written in some areas. But I think another thing that adds to the plagiarism that's going on here, because it really is plagiarism, is the proximity of it. Look, the whole "this is my run, so I'm going to keep pulling from writers before me" is going to happen in comics. But when you're telling the same story with the same characters, the same themes, the same symbols, I'm sorry, like, you're plagiarizing somebody. And the fact that your run started 5 years after this other writer. So, like, Snyder's run on Batman starts in 2011. When that happens, Morrison is on Batman Inc. And in Batman Inc., as this Court of Owls and Death of the Family stuff is going on, Grant Morrison is using the Ouroboros as this, symbol with the Leviathan and all this stuff in his run. And then as soon as 0 Year hits, what's the main symbol in 0 Year? The Ouroboros. Like, I'm just not sure how people, like the masses, aren't picking up on the uncanny and striking similarities between these two runs, because really, it's like Snyder really is, at least his Batman run, is just Diet Morrison. It's the same beats, the same characters, the same plot, the same symbols, and I'm sure I'm going to repeat that.
Okay. I just want to, unless you're still going, I want Connor to, defend your point, Connor. Like, what exactly in your mind does not make this plagiarism? Like, what are, like, the specific things in your mind that doesn't make this plagiaristic? Cutting you off there, Jake, just for a second. Connor, I have a minute to defend.
I think calling it plagiarism is perhaps trying to go into hyperbole, because it's this is Grant Morrison's run is about the history of the Batman character and the Batman title. And it's all about incorporating things like the Club of Heroes and William Hurt and all those sort of things. And I think that when it comes to this story, it's and mostly when it comes to Snyder stuff in general, it's about Gotham City more broadly, which I think distincts it a little bit, and specifically, singularly, Batman as a character. Snyder has said that this story, The Court of Owls, was going to be his next story, regardless if Dick Grayson was going to be Batman still, or if Bruce Wayne was coming back. And Bruce Wayne came back, and he still went with the same story. Because it's not ultimately about Batman. It's about, I think he does a decent enough job about making it Bruce Wayne-centric, about Batman's understanding of his own territory. Morrison's whole idea of Batman is that he's not territorial. It's that he is a symbol of crusading and justice and stuff across the entire world and across all of time and all of space. And so, the stuff with the Ouroboros is weird. I can't blame it there. And there are certain panel layouts that are pulled right out of R.I.P., especially in the. Is it Endgame, or is it I'm thinking of the one where in R.I.P. he's in the coffin, and then I think it's in Super Heavy when Gordo has a similar panel layout. That just kind of strikes me as a writer being referential, because I do know Snyder likes Morrison. like, I don't know. I feel like when it comes to just calling it plagiarism, it's like if that's plagiarism, then Morrison plagiarized every single writer before him, but he didn't. And so, like, I just think plagiarism is a top shelf word that people like to go to because it's hyperbole and it's extreme.
I do understand
Look,
that. Sorry, Jake, you go. Okay.
Look, I mean, I don't mean to use that word as hyperbole, and that is something that I take very seriously. But to the point of Morrison plagiarizing, his goal when he set out was to incorporate all of Batman's history. But that's different than retelling all of that history within his own run, which is not what he did. And so while with the Court of Owls specifically, the whole Bat God thing doesn't come up, that is exactly what happens to Bruce Wayne in Super Heavy. Like, he dies, he's not Batman for a while someone else takes the mantle, and then he comes back as a Bat God. Like, I guess we'll just agree to disagree on this.
Probably for the best, because I know we'll be for hours.
To bring up this whole Grant Morrison thing, because this is really where it starts. And while I think Snyder's run on Batman really isn't anything special, even though I do like Zero Year a lot as a story, and I think Endgame is okay, I think all of those problems with his run, with it being too derivative, I guess we'll just say that word because it's safer, of Grant Morrison, starts here because it's starting at the same premise. You're using the same tools. You're trying to tell the same story, even though your focus is different. Because the ultimate goal that Snyder has is to break Batman's psyche and build him up into this sort of different character, and that's the exact same journey that Grant Morrison takes him on.
We'll probably just have to agree to disagree, unless Connor had one more point to make.
Okay. I'll concede points. I think that, like, Snyder's run on Batman is a lot like a nuclear power plant. Like, it achieves nuclear power and it achieves sustainability in 0 year, and then immediately after it starts melting down, and then it's like, no, I'll concede. Like, in Super Heavy, the whole, like, Bruce Wayne having to die and do all that stuff, like, it strikes me more as clumsy writing than plagiarism, where it's like, I really liked Morrison's run, I'm going to play with his ideas, but those ideas are so specifically Morrison that it's like you just end up looking like you're just being Morrison, I think. And I don't think it's maliciously intended of, I'm just going to steal these ideas because I like them. It's like, I want to play with those ideas, but they can only really be played with one way. And then you get to Metal, which is just Final Crisis. Like,
exactly.
It's just Final Crisis, but lame.
I have I'll have a bit of an analogy sort of as the outsider looking in, because I'm definitely the outsider here. I mentioned this a couple times, Connor, on our last time we talked about Snyder, but I'm going to mention it here to the audience, because some of them might know what I'm talking about. He reminds me of a Doctor Who showrunner, Stephen Moffat, the previous Doctor Who showrunner before the new guy right now. And his big problem was he was kind of a bit of a one-trick pony. He always told the same kind of story every season, same trope, like, the Doctor is dying, it's a big event, yada yada. And the first season he did it was really good. Like, that was like, he was at on point, really good. But then he kept telling the same story again and again, and it just kind of got worse and worse. And kind of, He managed to pull it off by the end, though. He kind of had, like, one more redeeming moment before he left. But it's sort of like, you're just telling the same story. And I'm getting that same sense from Snyder, Scott Snyder, not Zack. Like, 0 year... Yeah, it has a lot of the Snyderisms, but they're used the most effectively. And then in that Justice League story you're talking about, Connor, it seems like they're used the worst. And here, well, we're going to debate that because that's why we're here. So that's kind of where I'm kind of coming down on.
The difference between Snyder's Justice League run and his Batman run is there's characters in his Batman run. You can say they're derivative or pulled right out of Morris and stuff, but to me, they're still characters. I think that when it comes to this run, it's like he got a lot of acclaim and got really big really fast.
That was same with Stephen Moffat. Like, his first season, like, he became too big. And
so, but it's like, you're right. There is an element of one-trick pony here because it's like, it's almost like time traveling where it's like you see where all of his ticks come from, but like all of the ticks were fresh and they were like kind of like ideas in how you can structure structure an issue. You know what I mean? What you can do with 20 pages. and how they almost like feel like each chapter is a part of this 11-part story, but it's also works as a 20-piece page of sequential storytelling, and it's like it's satisfying in its own way without being, without, I think, what Bendis suffers from time to time, where it just feels like I paid $4 for like a scene of a movie.
It seems like he's the kind of writer who needs a filter. Like, you need someone to, like, hold the leash and sort of, like, say, nope.
Yeah, I totally agree. Definitely. And it's like, but for whatever reason, DC writers or DC editorials like, well, you seem to sell books. We're not going to edit your books.
Yeah, but, let's get into the book, actually. Let's talk about the book on its own. So I guess one thing we can talk about, I guess, is, you brought up Connor Gotham, and how this is a very, Gotham-central book. And I know, Jake, you were talking about how, or was it Red, or maybe both of you, talking about how you both like a lot of the history of Gotham, and, I did find that kind of interesting. I will say at the beginning, though, I was kind of confused. Like, what's going on? Why is Batman fighting all these people and Joker being his friend? Then I read later, like, oh, that's why it wasn't Joker in the first place. Never mind. My confusion was just me being not reading the whole thing yet. So
Well, I mean, that was the point. The point of it was supposed to be shock value. Like, look at this amazing first issue of this new continuity where Batman is facing Joker. What? Now you have to pick up this issue for $3.99 or whatever the fuck it was priced at that point.
Prices. But who wants to talk about the history of Gotham? Jake, I know that was something you actually found interesting, so we'll start with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's a good thing to start with positives because there are some here, and I don't want to be completely unfair to this, even though I think there are some definite problems with it. But a lot of the stuff that isn't it being derivative of Morrison comes at the end. I really like the first issue. I think Batman #1 is actually a really solid issue, and really holds the whole piece together thematically, although I wish that that same level of care with the story was consistent throughout the whole thing, because we start off with this little tidbit of information about Gotham and what the city is and what it means. And even though Bruce talking about it in front of his peers is a little cliche, because it ultimately ends up being Gotham is the future and we work towards the future, which is, a really stereotypical answer, and really any character and anyone who's been Batman, importantly, can say that. But I think that starting off the first couple issues here with little tidbits of information about Gotham City, and then sort of blowing it up to be wider in the first issue thematically, but in like the actual story that's being told in the panels, we're getting smaller and smaller to more character moments, I think is really great.
Yeah, I liked a lot of the business and political machinations going on. I always like it when I see Bruce Wayne like trying to use all his money and influence to like better the city. Um, Especially because I feel like I just think that's a good idea. Like,
And that's great, but to be honest, we're really vague and about what that actually means. I mean, we're going to build new buildings and they're going to have bat bunkers in them, but then we never return to that idea until later on in his run. And it would have been nice to see him sort of alter his plans, but still continue to go through with them after his fight with, I guess, Owlman.
Owlman, different Owlman people. Yeah, I like that. I like some of this politics stuff. Especially because too many people just accuse Batman of, oh, you're just beating up people and you're not doing anything with your money. Like, nah, if you read the comics, he does stuff with his money. He does a lot of good things with his money. Connor, what would you like to add to like the history of Gotham?
So when it comes to this, I like how it deals with I think this is a very accessible run, and I think that's maybe why a lot of people who really enjoy Scott Snyder's Batman are probably new readers. I don't want to be condescending or mean or anything, but I was a new reader and it really attracted me. And I think that when it comes to it, what makes it work as a #1 is it understands that new readers who come to buy comics are familiar, are generally people buying Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and all the really big titles because they're familiar with them in extra media. like video games and movies and such, and they already have their perceptions of what the tropes are. They know what Gotham City is. Oh, it's the rough city. I know who Bruce Wayne is. He's the rich guy whose parents are dead. And when it comes to reading this, I had those projections, and just kind of through cultural osmosis, I kind of knew what Batman was, and I also really liked the Nolan's films. This was pre Dark Knight Rises, and so I was really excited for Dark Knight Rises, and I was getting into reading comics, and so reading this, I like how it. As a new reader, it was cool to me because it's like, oh, you think you know Batman? Well, Batman doesn't even know Batman, sort of thing, where it's like, I think I know what Gotham City is, and if anyone knows Gotham City better than me, it's Batman. And then it's revealed that he doesn't even know Gotham City because there's been this whole thing that's been under the surface the whole time. And I found that to be quite thrilling as a reader. I also find it continues to be thrilling, and I think that comes through the storytelling. I remember reading the issue where he's going from like building to building and finding the 13th floor in each building, and finding these little like lairs, these owl nests, and I thought that was so creepy. And I really liked how the panel. I love Capullo's panel layouts of like the owl eyes next to each, and I just thought it was wonderful and quite thrilling. And I think that Gotham City's history in this, I like how it deals with the meta element of you as a reader think you understand Gotham City just because you've been here for a while and because you follow Batman, and you don't. And I think that's a neat premise for a story.
No, I would agree.
I agree.
I think also kind of bring up a good point about new readers coming into this, and I think that's why there is such a base for Scott Snyder's support, especially for this. Although some of them I know are not the, I don't want to get into that too much, but I think that's always one of the biggest issues for me in comics is I'm like, where do I start? Like, what is the most accessible area for me? It's like, going back to Grant Morrison. We're gonna bring up Grant Morrison a lot. I apologize. It's kind of inevitable with this. Um, I know that he kind of is like, you don't start with Grant Morrison. So when I'm reading him, like, okay, I'm sure I'm missing something here. I'm just not sure what yet because I don't know a lot of this stuff. Um, and I think it just depends for a lot of people whether or not they like the Scott Snyder stuff because it's accessible or not. And you did clearly, because comics aren't always the most accessible stuff. Something though about the whole we find out the ancient evil of the Court of Owls stuff. I forget. Is it in this book that we find out the Court of Owls were responsible for the Wayne murders, or is that another comic?
I don't think that they were.
Or was that?
So,
or am I getting confused with Gotham the TV series?
no, so it's sort of implied, right? Because so in around issue 8, there was a price hike on this book to make it into a $4 comic, and because of that, they had to include 8 extra pages, and that meant that they had to start doing backup stories. So that's why you have like the Fall of the House of Wayne little story with art by Raphael Albuquerque, and in that you get sort of this little nothing story about Alfred's dad and the whole like history of Lincoln March's name and how they may or may not be responsible for a car accident that Helen or not Martha. How could I forget that name? Martha.
Why did you say that name? Why did you forget that name?
Yeah. So that's. I don't think they're responding. I think that is Gotham, the TV show, that's kind of responsible for bringing in them into the Wayne's murder, but.
Well, because they even say, like, Bruce says that when he was a kid, he couldn't fathom it being some random Joe Chill that, killed his parents. He thought that there had to be some, supernatural design behind it, and that's the entire reason why he went after the court.
Oh, okay. See, I just prefer it myself when it just is some random Joe Chill. I kind of just like the random act. of violence just causes all this. I'm not like I'm okay with like conspiracies and these grand sorts of organizations, but it's sort of like I don't like it when it gets too like interconnected with everything. It's just
sorry, I do too. I think that they're kind of playing it safe by saying that they attempted to kill the Waynes, but it was a car accident and it wasn't the time that the Waynes were shot. So I think they're trying to have their cake and eat it too by saying there was some design and there was a will from the court to try to off the Waynes because either they weren't cooperating or whatever. So I think it is kind of easy, and I think that gets into a larger sort of issue here where, and this we always do this with Batman, where we keep adding more and more stuff to the origin, and it just doesn't make sense. Because like, oh, isn't it so convenient that Bruce Wayne sort of was like trying to track down the Court of Owls and be the detective right after his parents were killed because he thought that they were behind it, and now all of a sudden they're coming back. You know, what a surprise. And now we're adding this little wrinkle in of this car accident that conveniently Bruce doesn't remember. I mean, when you're a kid and traumatic experiences happen, but you know, always with Batman, like when he falls into the hole into the Batcave, and then when his parents get murdered, we never establish that Bruce Wayne like forgot some details of it until Batman, and that completely fucks him up as a character. So I just feel like we keep constantly doing that and trying to tie everything that Batman is dealing with present day in continuity back to his origin to make it thematically a circle, which is just unnecessary. Like, we don't need to keep coming back to this, even though, you know, the premise of Bruce having a brother is interesting. But, you know, the best thing about this new Owlman is his costume. Like, that's it, because, you know, he disappears for like 6 issues, and before he does that, he's in the hospital. And if Batman really is the world's greatest detective, I'm not sure how he's not picking up on this guy that he just met, who tried to meet with him the same time that he was attacked by these assassins, is, you know, giving him all this information about the court that seems, you know, strangely and oddly specific when this guy is running for mayor and is trying to gain some power in the city. And then he conveniently shows back up again when he dies. You know, Bruce hasn't seen him since. And then, you know, he's surprised that he pops up. But then this is what Snyder always does. His excuse is this character, the protagonist, isn't thinking clearly because he's dealing with all of these things, these challenges that, you know, force him to reflect on his beliefs and his relationships and challenge the things that he's thought about and known since his origin that made him into a superhero. So that's why he's not truly the, you know, world's greatest detective right now, and why he's not picking up on that. But, you know, that's just not exactly a feasible justification. And I think that the mystery here starts off really well in the first issue, and I like how much of a detective Batman is being at the end of the first issue, with, you know, this being like an artist loft and the paint and the stuff that he's smelling on the wall, and how he sort of figures that out. But I don't think we ever really recapture that magic again.
No, and just to
Yeah,
add,
no,
sorry. No, go ahead.
I would even go as far as to say I love the first 6 issues of this story, and I think the strength of its like first half is really what carries it for me. Because I'll concede, yeah, the second half of the story ain't very good, and the ending kind of sucks. It does.
And part of it is because it was turned into an event. Like, if you get done reading the first trade and you're done with issue 7, you pick up issue 8, and now you have all these timestamps with precise moments, because like half of the meat of the story happens in the 12 other Bat books that they had going on at the same time.
And that's something I've noticed was so sorry, Connor.
You know, I was just gonna say, like, you are right. Like, Snyder has this tendency of bringing something up and setting it up, completely dropping it, and then just at the last minute going, "Aha! Remember that?" You know, we get that with Gotham is in the first issue of this. We do nothing with it for 10 issues, and then Gotham is all of us. Well, thank you. Now it's thematically relevant, and then, but it's not just that. It's with Lincoln March, and then it's also with his run as a whole. Gotham is a thing in Batman, the Court of Owls, and then it's nothing for like 40 issues, and then in his last
Gotham
issue,
is Nothing.
At the very last issue, it was like, remember what Gotham is? That's important now. Gotham is all of us, or something like that. It's like, great. You're right. Like, the whole thing with Lincoln March is kind of ridiculous. Batman should be like, I've been written by Jeff Loeb before. I know what's going on. And it's like, it's the guy you just met.
Oh man.
And I remember getting to that revelation at the end and being sorely disappointed because this came out the same day as Before Watchmen Minutemen #2, the final issue of Batman Court of Owls. So Batman #11 came out the same day as Before Watchmen Minutemen #2. And I remember reading Minutemen #2 and thinking, that is a perfect, like, 20-something page comic book. That's brilliant. And then reading that and being like, oh, was this story always this lame? And I've gone back to it. It's not, but it has a weak ending.
It's sort of. I think that's sort of the problem with just eventizing everything, whether that was DC or Snyder who chose that.
No, that was DC.
Okay, that was DC who chose that. I can see this story honestly being kind of interesting, just as a small little. Well, look, here's a mysterious society called the Court of Owls. Batman's gotta stop it, but now it's like this is all tied to Batman's past, and oh my gosh, and it's all connected, and like. Just give me a good small story.
I think they can get away with it in this story, because like it's New 52. It's a new continuity allegedly, except now not anymore. Except even then, I don't really.
Let's not try that. We're gonna hurt some brains.
I'm giving myself a conniption fit right now. So what we have is we got that, and so when you have new readers coming on board, and it's like the origin ain't what you thought it was. That's exciting for new readers. And
exactly.
You do it once, get it out of your system, you're fine. I think this story is hindered by subsequent stories. And I like 0 Year because all that stuff that they deal with in Bruce's past is post his parents' death, but pre him going on like a vision quest into like, all these other, it's like this weird point in his life where he's like in school. And I like that. That's what you do then. And then you get to like super heavy and other stuff where it's like Bruce Wayne, you know what I mean? It's like he also won the Nobel Peace Prize, but he forgot about that when he was a kid. It's like, oh, great. And so what else did he do? He's also the Wizard of Oz. And so it's like,
what
you get though is, sorry, yeah, what were you saying?
No, you can go ahead and finish up.
Yeah, but when it comes to the Court of Owls, though, it's like I like the whole idea of the origin is not necessarily what you thought it is, and tying that into Gotham City on a broad sense. That works for this story. Mm-hmm. I think that in hindsight, it doesn't have staying power because of subsequent redactions. And I think we have those redactions because this was successful.
That's fair. And I think you make a really good point about 0 Year to speak broadly about Snyder's run again, because that point in Bruce Wayne's life where he's come back from his training or is still like being trained but is not Batman yet is almost like this purgatory for the character where he's trapped and like can't move up or down, and we never explore it as the character because as the audience we always want to see him as Batman. But to talk about Court of Owls, I think the problems with the story, it gets really, 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 really like almost unreadable towards the end because there's just so much that you're expected to, understand going from panel to panel and issue to issue. There's like so much happening in those spaces there. But I think the ultimate problems with this story are really set in foundation from the beginning because of the way that we're setting up this mystery and how just like incompetent Batman seems in the sense that he's not able to figure this out. And so I think that's what ultimately makes the ending not as satisfying as it could be because, and this is something Snyder does all the time, especially in his Batman run where the protagonist is missing something that's right under their nose, and that's literally Lincoln March's last line to him, like something about the Foundation and how he has to have a bigger perspective and not miss stuff that's right in front of his head. And again, when you're Batman and somebody is telling you you need to look around you and make sure you're not missing anything, first of all, how is that not a little suspicious? But why would you not heed those words of advice? Especially considering that you're getting all this evidence that the court is around, real, and acting. And I think, uh, Dick Grayson coming in and out of the story in random spots, but suddenly having all this thematic significance to it, which is arbitrary, which is this Talon was his grandfather, kind of a thing, is just highlights those problems. But I think it's especially bad in the case of Lincoln March, because if he is the ultimate big bad and the mirror of Bruce Wayne, because he keeps talking about how he's his mirror and smashing him through mirrors, and he's wearing a Batman costume, but it's not a Batman costume because it's an Owlman costume. Like, what? I'm not understanding why we're bringing this character in for like a page on issue 1, a couple pages in issue 2, and then a couple pages in issue 3, and then he's not back again until what? Like issue 8 or 9, he dies, and then he's back in the last issue. Like, this is a new character, and you're right, Connor. Seeing that similarity to Hush, where we bring in this character and we're finding out all this information about him bit by bit by bit, but then we're expected to feel for him or sympathize with him or feel like he's a sufficient enough antagonist for the hero at the end of the story, but it just ends up falling apart.
I remember I know this is a bit of an off topic, but it's kind of relates to this. I remember I think people were saying that Lincoln March was going to be the Arkham Knight once upon a time during that big rumor mill.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Somebody said it was going to be like his brother or something. I think Red might have told me that. He said like he talked about it on a forum years and years ago, before all that went downhill pretty quickly.
No, look, just to give this some credit, I think Batman #5 is a masterpiece. That's the issue where he's in the labyrinth, and you get all those pages where you have to read with the book, I guess, from the opposite orientation. What's the word? The vertical one, the portrait one, not the landscape. Sorry, I'm totally blanking on my words right now. I think that in and of itself is fascinating, and this may be just because I haven't read a lot of Batman before the 2000s, but I've never seen this done in a Batman comic, let alone in any comic, where for like 8 or 10 pages we're just telling the story from the side, and that's really getting us inside the head. And the panel layout is never in grids; it's all completely shaken up. And the issue after that, issue 6, is fantastic as well. And we're getting this weird imagery of Batman, becoming this beast, that culminates in that splash page of him ripping all the court off of him. I think that is some really, really great storytelling, and it's a really just great couple of issues. And I like that we're slowing down enough to spend time with Batman's psyche breaking, which, again, to be fair, is not exactly in the same way that Morrison did it. And is actually really different, but I love all the symbolism that's there, and I love how Bruce is walking around in the bat suit, but one of his eyes is exposed. Like, it's like that Spider-Man thing, but it's a reversal of that, because it's not like a positive, uplifting image of I'm Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I have to be both. I have a moral responsibility to be both. It's no, Bruce Wayne and Batman are both being psychologically tormented by the court, and they're both being stripped down at the same time. So we're sort of breaking that wall of the identities that are usually there in Batman.
I think I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, I see it.
I also love how eerie the bright colors of the walls are and the ground. Like, it's all like this white and bright colors, and like traditionally, like even in the context of this story, usually in the daytime, the pages aren't colored black; they're colored white, and there's brighter colors, and there's the sense of security you feel. And then that's when like the Talon attacks, inside the Seattle Space Needle, and then you have a similar thing happen in issue 6, where it's like these bright colors of like the walls and everything. And I think some of the pages are even colored white because the marble extends to the corners of the page, and yeah, it's ghostly, and it's like, again, we got these bright colors. And usually bright colors are a symbol of, security, of, okay, we're in the daytime. But nope, they're or used against you, and I quite enjoyed that. And then Harper Row shows up, and it all goes downhill. I've never liked Harper Row. I'm so glad she's gone. Stay in college, please. Don't ever graduate.
Well, these are comics, Connor. So aging does not happen a lot. So you
It's
might
gonna
get your
be
wish.
awful when she shows up and she's like, "I'm Car Girl. I can turn into a car." It's gonna be worse. I got my automatic engineering degree. I can turn into a motorcycle now. That's my superpower. Oh man.
I also hate that we called her Bluebird and gave her basically Nightwing's costume.
That was weird.
This is one of these
so
continuity things that I'm not quite aware of, folks. So
Okay, so to educate you, Joel, and to maybe by extension give the listener some context, when the New 52 first was showing off new costumes and everything, we got Nightwing, and even in this story, he's got a red like streak across his chest. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I noticed it's not the blue. I prefer the blue, but maybe that's because I grew up with the animated series, so I saw him first in the blue.
Well, everyone prefers him with the blue because that's his costume, and it was just like this weird, like, why did you give him red? It's like, yeah, whatever. And to me personally, it's like, hey, whatever, who cares? It's just Nightwing. And then we got Harper Row, who ends up, spoiler alert, becoming her own superhero called Bluebird, where she's got like a blue streak across her chest and a blue mask and a
And
blue
it's not
streak
even
in her
it's
hair.
literally in the same shape as
Yeah.
as Nightwing's costume.
Let's
She's more
be
running around in a
original.
Nightwing. She's just running around in a Nightwing costume, and it's like, what? Why did we ever take it away from Nightwing?
Well, and isn't technically his blue costume still in continuity at this point? Like he became Robin, had the blue costume, and then switched to the red.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't get it.
even more problematic.
I mean, I'm curious, Connor, since you said this is one of your first comics. Did you understand why there were 3 Robins with Bruce Wayne at the time when you were reading this?
Yeah, I knew who Damien was. I knew who Tim and Dick were, and Jason. Like, I knew who all the Robins were. I watched the animated series. I wasn't like a complete outsider. Like, I would see, I don't know, like, I would listen to people talk about comic books every once in a while because comics interested me when I was young. I just didn't ever read any. And I read stuff like Dark Knight Returns, and I read stuff like Year One and Long Halloween before I started reading current. So it's like I was aware of Batman mythology, and I knew who Damian was because I heard Bruce Wayne has a son, and I'm like, that sounds lame. And now I'm like, oh, why did I ever think that was lame? He's so cool. I love Damian.
You must go
He's
back
maybe
and
my favorite
re-educate
Robin.
your younger self.
Yeah, no, I watched a few YouTubers, and I was able to get onto them because they reviewed movies that I liked, and then in doing so, I found out that they were also like comic book reviewers as well. So I'm like, yeah, I like their personalities, so I'm going to listen to them talk comics as well. So that's how I found out about a lot of that stuff, which is weird because a couple of those people were also intrinsically tied with who reviews the reviewers in Geekvolution, which is how I ended up becoming entangled in you people. So that's wild.
It's all connected, folks. It's all
I
connected.
know.
So to briefly return to the Bat Family,
Oh, yeah.
Snyder does this all throughout his run where the Bat Family just randomly shows up, and like that happens in Death of the Family. But importantly, I hate how we just shaft Batgirl and how she's like suspiciously not important to any of this. She shows up in one panel and that's it. Like, yeah, Dick is coming around, but like I'm kind of curious why Tim Drake and Damian are so much more important.
And that's
than
added on to
Lord.
the fact that she was no longer Oracle, which I know was not happy. A lot of people were not happy about that. I know.
Yeah, which is fair. And to talk about Oracle, because this just sparked another thing in my head. Connor, you talked earlier about how you like the scene where Batman is going around, or maybe it was you, Joel, inspecting all of the
That was
sort
Connor.
of all of the Court of Owls bunkers, I guess, within the city, which is a really cool way to show how much of a grip that the court has over the city. And this is just a little nitpick, But Batman's in there and he's over his comms and he's like, Alfred, the fund established in Alan Wayne's name. Like, I need you to get this information. I'm not really comfortable with Batman going around talking to people by their first name on his comms when people can hear him. That seems, and like they do this in the Arkham games too, where he's like, Barbara, like do this, and this, or Alfred, fill Barbara in on what's been going on in Arkham City, and that's just a little thing where it's like, how are you really protecting your identity and other people's identities,
That's actually something I don't mind. I know it really actually doesn't make any sense, but I remember in later stuff, it got established the company Penny One.
Yeah,
and I thought that was like the worst thing ever. Like, I mean, say what you will about first names, but if you're giving away like part of people's last names, that's even worse, I think.
Come in, B-girl. At least you're B. I hope that never happens. I might.
Come in, Begordon. I mean, Barbara, are you there?
I feel like we just sparked something for future bad writers. I apologize, future people of the world, if we spark something. Sorry, Jake, you were saying?
No, I mean, that's pretty much it that I had to say about that. It's just a little nitpick where you're right, Connor. It just doesn't make sense practically, but from a story reason, it's like Batman is calling people by their code names until or unless they're in danger or he's upset or whatever, and instead of calling them Oracle or whatever, he calls her Barbara because he's, experiencing some sort of trauma, which is understandable, but just practically it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
No, and that's a fair complaint. I guess I shouldn't be cool with either Pennyone or Alfred. Come up with something that is maybe not including somebody's name into
butler.
your code name.
The butler.
I swear, there's just some bad guy across all of time. He hears, "Hey Butler, come in," or "Hey Alfred, come in," or "Hey Pennyone, come in." He's like, Butler, Alfred, Pennyone. I mean, they'd probably get an idea really, really quickly, but whatever. That's irrelevant. So this book. Anyone else have any ideas about what to say?
We could talk about. I forget her name. She's the lady who has owl fingers.
You mean the older woman, or you mean Mrs. Powers?
I think
at the end.
I think it's the older woman. I think it's Mrs. Powers though, because isn't she like who looks like an owl?
Well, I thought that too, but the older woman that they're reeling in at the end of the labyrinth thing is in a wheelchair.
Oh, okay.
So maybe that's just her disguise, and it might be her. You know what? Since we're doing this and we're completely professional, let me flip through this stuff and try to get an answer while you guys continue to talk about stuff.
Well, I like that because it's like he's still hallucinating, so there's like an element of expressionism thrown in here where they're owls, and sometimes they look like humanoid owls, but sometimes look like humans with more owl-like features here and there. And I just thought that was really fun. I really like Capullo, and I think that both Capullo and Snyder work best when they're leaning into horror elements.
Well, actually, Connor, I guess
I feel like and that's indicative of this entire story, where the first half is really kind of a horror, mystery story, and it's so much better than the second half, which becomes an action story, and it's, I think, less satisfying.
Well, I guess that brings us to a good point. We could talk about the actual court. Like, Connor, I think, do you like the court? Do you think the court is a cool organization? I mean, I don't know. They didn't stand out much for me. I mean, except for the owl motif, and I do like owls. I actually do really like owls. I think they're really cool animals. But apart from that, like, I don't know. They just seem like business people wearing weird masks, and every now and again get cool one in a costume.
Yeah. So the Court of Owls is something that is. I can't separate myself from the first time I read this. Like, I just can't do that.
No, that's totally cool.
I wish I could, but it's like, I remember reading that stuff for the first time and being so intrigued and thinking I wanted one of those owl masks. I thought they looked so cool. And I just thought that, like, the whole idea of, like, the talons, and then, like, you start to learn a little by little, like, the mythology behind it all. And then in, like, they all die, and it's like kind of eerie and creepy, and I don't know. I liked all the stuff of the Court of Owls in this story. This story is once again negated by, or diluted a lot by what came after, where the Court of Owls are just a bunch of buffoons. Like later, after this story, because like you have, I think is it Metal where they show up, and they also show up in Super Heavy, and it's like they're just these bumbling idiots with their tails between their legs and like the pants around their ankles, and it's like, how can I possibly be scared of these people?
No, that's fair. I've heard there's been a bit of oversaturation.
They got really popular because of the story, and then it's like, well, they're popular now. They need to show up and everything, and the whole premise of the story is they're really, really secretive. Nobody's ever been able to find them, and now, until now, and we finally find them. What they should have done is just disappear. And if there's a new court, we don't know it for like 20 years. You know what I mean? Like we should know. Yeah. But now because they're popular, it's like DC editorial, I think, really hoarded this story out for all it was worth. You know, it started out as this cool idea, and then they couldn't just stop there. They had to turn it into an event, and we get. This is just, I think, ridiculous. I have the trade in my hand, Batman: The Night of Owls, which collects like 12 issues or more, and so all that stuff just kind of slows the actual story down, and it actually interferes into Batman number 9, where it says, I got to go to Arkham first. Hey, if you want to know what happens then, go read Tony Daniels' awful, Detective Comics number 9. And then you go read that, and then you go back to reading, like, most of the way through Batman number 9 in order to read, like, what happens there. And so it's like, now not only are you, like, trying to throw all the stuff you can with like, a line-wide crossover with everything Batman, but now it's also infringing on an individual issue, and then on top of that you get to the end of it and it's like, well, now we have to throw in all these backup stories to really flesh out the creepy history of the court, and now when we're done with that, we're going to sell this stuff with, you can buy volume 1 with a Court of Owl mask, and we're going to show him up the Batman versus Robin animated movie, and now he's going to
that's right, I forgot about that,
show up in Gotham. And now they're going to be in Metal and Super Heavy. And they're going to recur, and they're just beat up everywhere. Now we're going to give it a Talon ongoing series. And now it's like, shut up with the Court of Owls already. They were
I feel like we're going to have a comic where we're just driving around Gotham, and then somebody notices a big building with like a giant gold Talon symbol. Like, what is there?
It's like, can we just put them away, put them to bed? I almost feel like Snyder was realizing that, so he killed them off, so they couldn't be used again. And then they were.
Well, and again, I think this is another example of Snyder trying to have his cake and eat it too. We see that, like, the members died, but then Bruce remarks later that this isn't all the members, and one member from within tried to kill them, but there are other, like, factions, and the court is bigger than Gotham. It's like a global thing, so they'll be back.
Like Hydra, but
and it's this like dumb cliche kind of thing because this stuff blew up, and it's just really painful to get through. If the whole point of the story from the beginning is to not have the man behind it all and just the court as this force of nature similar to the Joker is, then why even bother having Owlman? Because aren't all the Talons like the new Owlman? Why even bother trying to screw with the origin?
I feel like
Go ahead.
I was about to say, I feel like the Court of Owls like cut off one Talon, 2 more will take its place. Like sounds like a Hydra thing.
Well, I mean, he cuts off one Talon, and then they wake up all of them. Like, why didn't you do that earlier? I don't understand. And from a story perspective, but us as readers know that because the story blew up, they wanted to make this into events. So how do you make this a new event? You have a army that the evil organization creates that is vaguely less powerful and more easily defeatable than the actual threat that first came up. So all the other lesser heroes can defeat them with ease, even though there's a lot of them. But then the main hero has to defeat the one who's stronger than all of them. It's just like I don't I don't care by the last couple issues. I really don't. I mean, Greg Capullo is consistently great throughout Snyder's run, and really the only thing that is consistently great because he's a great illustrator and a great storyteller. And I like his Owlman design, and I like the rest of the designs for the rest of the court, but just on like a story level, not on a storytelling level, I just don't care. Because like you said, Connor, like you go from issue 6 and 7 to issue 8, 9, 10, it completely turns from a horror story about like Batman's psychology and his relationship to his. Now he's fighting a giant army for his city
with a giant robot.
With a giant robot that we've never seen before, and that's the one design that Greg Capullo did that I really don't care for because it's oddly like out of its time and doesn't look that advanced because he's got the grill over his mouth, which makes no sense.
I think it looks cool, but
I mean, it looks cool, but like especially because the whole weakness is the cold. Like if Bruce is out there, how is that suit really protecting him when he has that opening over his mouth still? I don't know.
I mean,
well, I want to say really quickly, now that we're talking about issue 8 and 9 and Greg Capullo, I think this is an interesting historical tidbit. When Batman first launched, it was the third Wednesday of the month is when it came out. And Greg Capullo did all 11 issues, and issue 9 came out or 8 or 9 came out on the second Wednesday of the month. I think the previous month was like a 5-week month, so he still was able to put it out in 4 weeks, but still, that's awesome, I think. And there isn't there's no point in these 11 issues where I feel like he's like taking shortcuts to try to make a deadline.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting, but yeah, I guess I just don't like the Court of Owls much, just aesthetically. Like, I don't know, it's like they don't really pop out to me that much. Like, apart from like the creepy mask, they're just and Owlman. Obviously, there's people in suits, and every now and then some of them have talons on their as hands.
I thought that was kind of cool because it's like they almost look like a normal person, but they got those masks on, and it's almost like if you weren't looking at it just right, they could be blending in, and that's kind of the idea. Is you don't know who the Court are; they blend into everyday people. And I thought that was neat.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's a cool idea. I don't know. Maybe it just didn't work for me personally. I don't know.
No, I get that, and I do have a question for you, Joel. So Zero Year, and I talk about how it has a different inker, but they also FCO Placencia continues to be the colorist for all things Snyder Batman. He really changed it up in 0 Year, where he's going like psychedelic colors and like pinks and oranges.
See, I think I like that more. I don't know. Like I like more the more cartoony-ish looking colors, and here it's a bit more
grounded,
gray. I talked about this with Jake too. Yeah. When we did our art comparison, like I attach myself more to Batman comics that look more cartoony. Just because I'm like that's my base of Batman kind of comes from the cartoons. Or like, oh, it looks like the cartoon. So in my brain, it makes the link and it's like, oh, positive. I'm not against grounded necessarily, but I'm just on a personal level more interested in like cartoony looking, wacky.
Well, one would think that Capullo's style would fit that really well because his stuff is like so gritty to the point that it's exaggerated and so like almost noirish in the line work, and really similar to Jim Lee in that sense where he's got a lot of shadows and a lot of lines, again similar to Jim Lee, like you would buy this book if it was just the line work with no colors because everything that's there, all the visual information, all the storytelling is there in the lines. The color just accentuates it.
I wonder if I would like this if we're completely black and white.
Well, I mean, they do have a noir version of this, but I actually have the unwrapped editions, which is just the pencils of Court of Owls and Death of the Family. I think those are the only two Snyder and Capullo ones that they released. Yeah, and I've read through those, and those are fantastic.
And I should say that the unwrapped version of this story is the only release that collects all 11 issues together.
Oh, wow. I mean, I have the two
and isn't it
trades.
12? Isn't the 12th issue the Owlman one?
No, issue number 12 is the Harper Row story, and that's by Becky Cloonan. So,
Oh,
I like that.
maybe I was just not keeping count.
I like to ask you this, and Connor. Maybe you. I'm not sure if Jake did this, but I know you did, Connor. What's the pacing like? Just reading it like month to month? Because I just bought these in trade at my bookstore. So
that is the thing. I'm glad you brought this up because I was going to bring this up later. This Snyder's Batman in general just reads better month to month, where you get your little 20-page short story that's in service of a greater whole, and you get it. It takes a little bit longer to read because it has more dialogue, and you feel satisfied, and it's intriguing, and you anticipate what's going to be coming next, and then you get the next issue, and you clamor at the bit for the next one. You get what you can, and a lot of these broad kind of more story, like broader reaching story problems, you don't realize when you're reading it month to month, because you read it and you see the issue as its own piece, and then you get the next part of it, and you remember the events and the intrigue of the last issue, but you don't maybe necessarily remember all of the thematic stuff that ties over and all of the story stuff. You think of this story as its own 22 page entity, but you're not thinking about it as this, like, I don't know,
grand book.
100 pages, hundreds of pages collected together. So when you do read it like this, like, my least favorite readings have always been when I have read it collected, and I think that's telling.
Interesting. See, I have to read this collected because I have a bookstore. I don't have a comic. And,
No, I completely get it. Yeah.
Jake, did you read this just collected, or did you used to read this month to month too? Or
Yeah, so when I started buying comics, I had started buying stuff like Long Halloween and some of the most like prominently known stories. Like a lot of people, I started with Batman and Justice League, and so I started reading this run in trade. So I wasn't able to experience it monthly, but when I was reading this, I had sort of thought back to the first time I'd read this, because I read both trades. Well, I read the first trade in one sitting and thought it was pretty good. I read the second trade in another sitting, and then I thought it was just okay. And to be honest, I don't think I've reread this stuff since. I've just continued to see the panels, see people talk about it, see reviews on it online, and I'm vaguely familiar enough with the story, which is, I think, another weakness of it, that, like, well, I mean, maybe not. Maybe that's too harsh. Where, like, I can remember enough about what was going on, because there really wasn't a whole lot going on once you get past issue 6. That was happening in the actual Batman book. That I can listen to people review it when I haven't read the thing in 4 fucking years. But maybe that's not completely fair. But when I read through it this time, my goal was to read it twice before we did this, and I read the first issue last week, and then I got through the first couple of issues, and then I just started over a couple days ago to read the whole thing. But I think just as this went on, issue to issue, I talked about how I liked the first issue and issues 5 and 6, but particularly 5, with the way that we're messing with the orientation and the way that we're reading the pages to signify that Batman is going through this psychological stress. I think is really great. But as far as issue to issue goes, I think it would be difficult, because I think it suffers from not a lot happening in the Batman book when the Batman book is the main event. And we kind of talked about this earlier, how a lot of the meat of the story, like the plot of what's actually happening, happens in other stories, in the other books that they had going on. So I don't know.
Unfortunately for me, I don't know what that meat would be, because I didn't read those stories.
Well, then it's weird because, like, have you? Well, I guess you haven't, Joel. But Jake, have you read those the tie-in collection?
No, because by the time I got to the end of the second volume of Batman: The City of Owls, I was like, Owlman's cool, but I really don't care about anything else. So
Okay.
I just didn't pick up any other tie-ins.
Basically, what happens is you get a bunch of inconsequential stories that are just Batman said he needed help. I'm going to punch this Talon. And then you get the Talon's backstory. All right. I sure hope we survive the night. And then you get the next one, and it's the same thing. It's like they got a template that, you know, like Gail Simone and Scott Lobdell and all, like Tony Daniel and David Finch, like they are all just trying to like make a paycheck, so they just like crap out something on a template, and it's like,
oh
oh
man,
my god, it's like I can't. But I will say, the Detective Comics issue is a Tony Daniel issue where he fights a Talon who's going to kill Jeremiah Arkham. And this is Tony Daniel we're talking about with Jeremiah Arkham. So he basically, I think he becomes Black Mask again, or something like that. The mask is haunted. It's basically a Goosebumps episode. It's horrible. Yeah, that's the one that sticks out because Batman issue number 9 is a worse comic because you have to go read that issue. And when you go to read that issue, it is monumentally bad. So... yeah, you don't miss anything when it comes to the tie-ins. They are just inconsequential punching Talons, and you're like, oh, look at that Talon looks kind of different.
Speaking of tie-ins,
That's what I figured.
Since I know we said we weren't going to talk about this in the chat, but I just got to ask, like, after the book, we get into this other story about like these two kids and then Mr. Freeze. Is that had anything to do with any of this? I was so confused. Like, and there's like in the City of Owls comic, I have the trade. There's like a story involving Mr. Freeze and then like these two kids who look like anime characters for some reason.
So basically, that's young Mr. Freeze and his mom, who's in a wheelchair, and he kills his mom. I don't know, whatever. The point is, like, that was a tie-in to the City of Owls. That was Batman Annual number 1. I think the most notable thing about that, it was a lot of people's introduction to Jason Fabok. It was my introduction to Jason Fabok, who has gone on to be so good. But he does very much look like the student of David Finch, for better, but mostly worse. A lot of his faces look the same. But there's a thing in... It's weird because it is Batman Annual number 1, and it's a tie-in to Night of the Owls, and it is the New 52 origin story of Mr. Freeze. It's trying to do all of this stuff at once, and it doesn't really do any one thing all that successfully, but the art's pretty. That's really all there really is to say about that.
Okay. I was like, when I read it, I was like going to it like, wait, what are these kids here for? Why do they look like anime characters? Like, what's going on? Did I miss something when I was not paying attention? Like, okay. I kind of just had to assume, oh, maybe this is just not part of the comic. This is just an extra story they put in. Did we miss anything? In terms of anything we have to talk about this comic? Anyone want to bring anything up?
Yeah. Scott Snyder, it's okay. You know, I'm a grown-up. You do not have to tell me what your stories are about. When we get to the last issue, that was one of the most disappointing issues when I first read it, because all that happens is Owlman ties up Batman and then lectures him like forever while he just hits him with buildings. That's all that happens, and he's like, I threw a little...
But Connor, it's thematically significant because he's talking about how he's a mirror of Bruce when he's smashing him through mirrors.
Whoa.
Mind blown.
You see, I didn't...
Exactly, mind blown.
I wouldn't have picked up on that had he not told me about it. But you see, the thing is, he's like, they cheat too. He's like, well, you were running your mouth, Hannibal Lecter. I put a bomb on you. And it's like, no, you didn't. I went through every single page. You didn't put a bomb on him. You cheated. And it's like, that is lame.
Well,
like, that would have been...
You can't get rid of a bomb. That's the lesson.
Yeah. Oh, and then it's like, oh man. No, I was really, really disappointed by that. And so here's like the weird thing about Snyder where I feel like a battered wife. where it's like,
Oh my.
you get this intriguing like setup, unless it's No Justice, in which case it sucks from the beginning, and it's like,
Sorry.
here is the premise of the story. It's intriguing. You're trying to figure out what's going on. It builds, and then they just tell you what it's about for like the last 20 pages. Well, like every character is diarrhea of the mouth. They just can't stop telling you what the story's about. And then it's like you get to those last 3 pages though, and it's like, ooh, there's some more intrigue. Oh man, they're telling you the next story is going to be even a little bit better, and you're like, okay, you got me hook, line, and sinker. I'm gonna be there. You know what I
Dang
mean?
it.
It's like
I have
right when
to
you
know.
think, right when you think you're fed up enough, they just put that little promise of something better at the end of the tunnel, and you're like, okay.
Trust
And
me,
then you
I've
read
had-
it, and it's the exact same thing. And I just feel like a battered wife at a certain point, where it's just like,
Oh, I've
why
had TV
do I
series
keep
like that all
going?
the time. It's like at the end of the season, they always put a little something like, oh, I gotta watch the next season now. Oh man. Also, yeah, that is a problem. I don't like the fact Scott Snyder has too much talking. Like, I'm all about communication, and I'm not against speechifying things, but like, sometimes I just want to look at the pretty pictures and let the picture tell a story. I don't want to have like a 20-hour lecture of this philosophical thing.
I am a communications major. I listen and put speeches together for a degree, right?
Right.
I get sick of the people talking. Like it's ridiculous. Like and I think I would be a lot easier on it if all of his characters didn't sound the same. All of
Yeah.
their speechifying sounds like it could be coming out of the same person. And I find that quite annoying.
I know, like, I know you should read the actual dialogue during a comic, but like for me, sometimes when it comes to comics, it's like I'm just in it for the art and the pictures. Like, because sometimes I get very lazy when I read, because I just lose concentration. It's like I just want to look at the pictures and just let that tell the story for me. Like, oh, Batman's now caught in a net. Now he's punching someone. Now he's going up a rooftop to look at something. It's sort of like that.
I can only imagine what this would have been like for you at the end. It's like, all right, you're still flying. Batman's still tied up in the flying. All right, here's another face talking. Okay, here's another face talking. All right, Batman's still tied up and they're flying. And there's another face talking. It probably got really repetitive.
Oh yeah. Jake, do you have any like last things to bring up? I feel like we're wrapping near the end here.
No, that's pretty much it. I think we covered it pretty well.
Ah, okay. Well, any last words, anybody? Want to make sure everyone got their piece?
I cannot tell you. I do love Zero Year. That is a great story.
And you can watch our review that we did of it a year ago on my channel. So,
I don't want to come off as someone who hates Scott Snyder. I like the guy's ideas. I think he's a competent writer, but it's like it seems like everything he does is just short of greatness, but in like a really frustrating way. And it's like, grr, I wish it was better than it is, except Zero Year, which is legitimately great.
again, it reminds me of Stephen Moffat. Because, again, like, that's the writer who's like, when he's bad, he's really bad, but, ooh, when he's good, is he good?
And then you get stuff like No Justice, which feels like it was written on a napkin, and they decided to turn it into a comic for some reason.
Well, on that note, folks, thank you for joining. Sorry Red couldn't be here. If he's listening in the comics, you can comments, not comics. He's listening in the comics. I don't know how that works. If he's listening to comments, I'm sure he'll say something. And you
Now, if this were a Grant Morrison story, it would make sense.
well, yes, of course. Grant Morrison's always listening in the comics. And comments, probably, too, because he's Grant Morrison. What can he do? And of course, you guys can listen and list stuff in the comment section too. Give us your opinions, subscribe, like, and until next time, everybody, see ya later. Take care.